You were stronger than your trauma. That's the topic we're here to talk about today. Now, many of us at some point in our lives have dealt with some kind of trauma, whether it be physical or emotional. And I think in 2020, it's very important to talk about trauma, especially with the knowledge about mental health that's out there now and the importance of mental health as we're going forward. Now, 2020, I think there's a lot of people out there that are experiencing trauma for the first time. Uh, with the lockdown, with the quarantine, there's just a whole slew of things that could be causing you trauma during this time. And for a lot of us personally, me included, we've dealt with trauma in our lives before. And I want everyone to understand that you are stronger than your trauma. And we're going to go into why. Now, when we look at the definition of trauma, we look at my definition of trauma, I think trauma, in my own aspect, is something that has happened to you physically or emotionally that kind of changes the way you think about certain situations, about your outlook on yourself, and how you kind of overall handle things. I think when we talk about negative types of trauma, and I do believe there is, based on that definition, a type of positive trauma that can help you in the better based on things that have happened to you. But when we look at negative trauma, I think it's a fear based on experience, if that makes sense. Regular fears can be anything, things that never have actually affected you, like a fear of heights. It's just naturally seeing it, you're afraid. But, trauma would be the fear of that heights because you fell off a mountain or something at some point, not to make it sound ridiculous, but that's just a little bit of an example. Now, the one thing I want to talk about as to why you're stronger than your trauma is because if you're watching this video, that means you're still here. You're physically still on this earth, and that in itself is why you're stronger than the trauma, because you can let the trauma affect you in a way where you can't function daily, where just certain things, based on how bad the trauma was, really affect your day-to-day life. However, I believe every day that we're still here, we can make a change. We can learn to overcome. Trauma could have affected you in a negative way where unfortunately something might have happened where you wouldn't be here currently. And I don't even want to think about that. But, by continuing your life day to day, you're slowly but surely overcoming that emotional pain, that physical pain that might have happened. Trauma could come from, and if we want to talk about physical real quick, trauma could come from, having an injury at the gym from running, tearing your quad or something, and then being afraid to run in the theory that it's going to happen again. Emotional trauma could be, growing up in a household where your parents were always fighting, or your parents were physical towards you, or, you had a sister or something who, stole from you, or things like that. And, just that might cause fear in your life of getting married, having kids, because you don't want to have to deal with that same thing that you dealt with. And there's where that fear based on experience comes in. But the biggest thing here is when trauma occurs, and we look at 2020, so many of us are probably going to have some kind of almost PTSD from being locked inside for so long, from quarantine, from almost feeling like Harry Potter living in the closet under the staircase. But one of the big takeaways, I think, is learning to cope correctly and learning to cope in a way where you can become stronger off of it. I never recommend telling anyone to turn to drugs or alcohol because you never really cope at that point. You're just kind of filtering it out of your mind for the time being, but at the end of the day, what's bothering you is still there. And overcoming trauma is a huge aspect, I think, in your own personal development and your own personal health. I've had some bad relationships in my past where it almost makes me afraid to date at that point because heartbreak and whatnot. And there's that trauma that always creeps up on me that as good as something might seem, there's going to be something that goes wrong with it. Because for personal experience, I've always said someone in my family's lineage had to have pissed off a witch or a gypsy or something and we're all cursed. But there's that fear there. But every day that we are still here, it means that trauma hasn't overcome us. It means that we're still fighting And that strength is eventually going to become so big to all of us if we believe that trauma is not going to affect us if we don't let it. The one thing I look at trauma as is almost like an obstacle, in the sense of, so from personal experience, I'm someone who I've always done better when people have doubted me. Someone tells me I can't do something, I'll go out there and do it. And trauma kind of can work in that same sense where, you have this thing in your brain or physically that is just that fear that keeps chipping away, that you're afraid that it's just going to all turn out like that again. And I look at it as that challenge to overcome, to prove that we can overcome our goals. Someone could have a fear of heights because of, as I mentioned earlier, getting like thrown off or falling down a mountain. And, one way to overcome that would be climbing that mountain and not falling off and safely coming down. That fear might slowly, disappear, thinking, oh, okay, our odds are a little better now. It didn't happen that second time. It's that fear that, whenever you put yourself in that situation, something is going to happen. And, trauma keeps a lot of us up at night. Trauma keeps us kind of anxious, depressed people, our minds racing at any given point. And the one thing that we all need to realize is that we're not alone in this situation. We live in a culture where these feelings are documented. They're well out there. Everyone, I think at this point, because of 2020, now has some level of trauma. And it's not a weakness. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people are finally starting to realize, that mental health issues, fears, aren't necessarily weaknesses. They're a consequence of things that have happened to us personally in our lives. And everyone always has their own battles. The thing is, I want to kind of go out, and as I've mentioned, by standing here today, by talking to you guys, you can now, I hope, understand that you don't need to live with that trauma. There's certain things that people want to say you have to accept it and move on, but it's almost like accepting it is allowing it to be there. Trauma, I think, is something that we all have to overcome, whether it's a loss of a loved one, something tragic happening in our lives. There's all things that we need to come to terms with, but then after coming to terms with it, we need to get past them. And saying get over it, it's not a phrase that we need to say here, because getting over it is it almost sounds insensitive to a point where it's like, oh, big deal, get over it. No, it's getting over it in the sense of how it's publicized isn't the word we want to use here, and overcoming it is the word we want to use, because overcoming trauma is a triumphant thing. It's a thing that many of us feel like we would have to deal with our whole lives until we find, that drive, until we find that support that can help us get past it. And sometimes a lot of it is just looking into yourself and remembering who you were before the trauma hit, and understanding that that trauma may have affected you in a way where it's currently changing your outlook, your life, your feelings about yourself at points, but that trauma, that doubt within yourself, doesn't need to exist. That doubt is there because of a reaction to something that occurred. And if you remember yourself before the trauma, that's who you are deep down. That is your strength, and that is where your soul is its most pure, is before the trauma, in a sense. And one of the things we need to realize is that person is still deep down within you, ready to come out, ready to be that strength. And it's a matter of you just knocking on that door and hoping that y'all can come together and overcome any of your flaws, any of your insecurities. And even then, there's so much support out there to help each other overcome the things in our lives and start to understand why the things happen, what we can do to get over them, and just become the best version of ourselves. Strength comes from within. Strength comes from realizing things about yourself that maybe haven't been so apparent until this point. And I think trauma is one of those things that, as I want to reiterate from earlier before we close, it's just one of those things where no matter what happens to you, it can get better and it will get better. You need to be able to not let the past consume you and learn that you were stronger than who you were. One of the greatest songs I listen to all the time is Better Than I Used to Be by Tim McGraw. I know some of you guys might not be country fans, but the lyrics of that song are basically becoming better than the person you used to be. And in a sense, it talks about trauma, because one of the lyrics is, I'm not as good as I'm going to get, but I'm better than I used to be. And he says also, I pinned a lot of demons to the ground, got a few old habits left, but there's still one or two I might need you to help me get. And it's that sense where you're fighting past your trauma, and to not be afraid to ask for help. It's one of those things where you can overcome anything mentally, can be overcome. Being able to change your mindset, being able to realize your strengths and work with them, and just remembering deep down just who you are in a positive sense, can help you overcome the trauma. Having yourself a great support group and having like-minded people, I think, around you that are positive, like-minded people, people that want to help you reach your goals, people that aren't going to bring you down and remind you of what maybe brought you down in the past. I think we all need that positive reinforcement. We all need that love, because at the end of the day, the love is what's going to keep us growing. The love is going to be what helps us build. And the love is what's going to make us feel like we're not alone in this. We're in this together as a human race. And, to just close, you are stronger than your trauma. You don't have to let it consume you. You don't have to let it destroy you. There are ways to overcome it. And it's just, at first, you got to remember that you're not alone, and just remember who you are and who you want to be. And that every day that you wake up and every day you keep moving forward, you're overcoming that trauma. You're overcoming your fears. You're overcoming your insecurities. And if you aren't, you need to take those steps to face those demons head on and realize that person that you were when they attacked you, when they came into your life, you're not that person anymore. You've grown from that. And you've become stronger than that. And your passion to defeat those demons, that trauma that affects you daily, it's probably deep down stronger than it's ever been. And it's just a matter of understanding that within yourself, guys. If any of you guys watching this ever need someone to talk to, ever need someone to vent to for advice, a friend, don't be afraid to reach out, guys. I want to wish you all a great day. And, I think I'm going to start doing these little mini-series again like I used to do 3 years ago when I first started the channel, because I think now more than ever it's important to understand that the mental health we might all be kind of suffering from at this point in time, we can come together and we can work towards this. And I want to put out more of these videos that keep everyone motivated, keep everyone strong and together through all of this, guys. So that's going to be my little thing for today. Maybe I'll be on doing this tomorrow if I can think of a good topic to talk about. But I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Stay strong out there. Stay safe. Stay humble. Stay loving. And until next time, I'll catch you later, guys. See you. Bye.